Hello, brilliant readers of the internet. I'm back and I have compiled here for you my favorite novels, so fiction, of the year. I think if there's a theme that is recurring, consistently they're books that sort of make you sit and think about time and memory and love and identity, but without resolution. And there's just no answer. And that's what I love about fiction and novels and literature in general and those are the best kind of books and the best kind of literature for me, is that they make you sit in the questions. Like Rilke said, you have to live out the questions. And I think talking about resolution, if we're gonna go into this new year, 2026, in this crazy old hag of a world, it's important to be able to be comfortable in the questions, where we are often sort of like thrust into thinking about things with too much certainty and trying to control outcomes and trying to sort of like impose certain frames or narratives onto everything just because we can't sit with the discomfort. And that's why I love these books, I think. So I don't wanna give a particular order as well. I used to love the ranking thing, but I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do that. I don't know why I would rank books. Like, they're all significant in all different ways. So these were just my best of the best. I got my notes here, just in case. So the first book I want to talk about is a book I read a while ago, actually. I read it in the beginning of last year, and it's The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And damn, I wanted to read this book for a really long time. And the reason why I hadn't gotten into it yet until then was because I was just so scared. I was so scared of opening that book. A father and a child traveling around post-apocalyptic North America. And it's so bleak. It's like the bleakest book ever. But at the same time, it's what's so devastating about it, and it's what's so gripping about it. And this is one of those books that really sort of like the whole experience of reading it, I just couldn't let go of this ball of in my throat. And I think that's also because I have children of my own, and in a world bereft of any sort of beauty, it's like so bleak. It's so like you just picture a wasteland where you just feel the cold, the barrenness of things. There's absolutely nothing in this world. You don't even know why the world has ended. It's just this father and his son, and they're just walking along that road, and they don't even have a specific direction. They just know they're going through the road, because what else can you do? But, like in life, what else can you do but just walk the road? That parental love contrasts with the nothingness, and that's what makes it so compelling and so just devastating. And the boy is so young and helpless, and the father is just doing his best to survive even though there is no hope. And so in some sort of paradoxical way, it is also like a plea for hope in a world where you don't even know where to find it anymore. I remember I was reading this in the Philippines. I was in this very sunny, beautiful place around nature. There was like the sea and like laughter of children around, and it was just a beautiful setting to be able to read that book. But I know that I will revisit this book. The prose is just so beautiful and phenomenal and poetic. Every single paragraph, your heart just breaks, and I just don't know how you can pull that off. But the guy, Cormac McCarthy, my man, he pulled it off. On the Calculation of Volume by Solvej Balle. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I think this is originally Swedish, but I might be mistaken. I don't know. I shouldn't speculate like her up, but anyway. It was great. I've never read anything like this. It is basically about a woman called, I think, Sarah-foulc. Tara. She's basically stuck in the 18th of November, and it's a time loop. She's a collector of rare coins or something like that, and rare books. And then at some point, she goes to Paris, and then she wakes up, and then she realizes it's the same day. It's the 18th of November. And you don't really know why. She doesn't really know why. And eventually, she sort of just decides to observe and compile notes on what is going on. In the beginning, she tries to sort of like piece together the pieces, why she would be stuck in an endless 18th of November. And then eventually it's more about a meditation on time and repetition and on the volume and on that specific container of what happens when you're stuck in one single day. Everybody else is just reliving the 18th of November as if it was the first time that they lived it, and not her. So she numbers her days. 100 days pass, 1,000 days pass. Anyway, let me have a sip of my wine. What is interesting about this book is like me realizing or imagining what I would do specifically. It's just time to be a little bit funky and do experiments and kind of like poke at stuff and people. So this book is sort of like an existential experiment about what happens to attention when time stops moving forward. It's less about plot and really what happens than it is about the movement of consciousness and how you are sort of like dissociated almost from yourself or from an essential aspect of being a human, which is solely, dependent on our conception of time. Like, time is everything. Time is our structure. Time is how we relate to ourselves and to the world and to the narrative of ourselves and our lives that keeps unfolding, and how we relate to moments. Are moments as significant when time stops to tally, when time stops to count, when time is still. And more importantly, not even when time is still, but when there's just an endless repetition going on around you and you're not part of that. And then you sort of start to understand the title of On the Calculation of Volume, which is a beautiful poetic metaphor for exactly the kind of novel that this is. So this has, I think, several installments. I read the first one and the second one, but I'm talking about the first one because I didn't really like the second one as much. I remember reading the first one and I was just like gripped by that like sort of experiment. Right now I'm reading the third one, which is, I guess every one of them has like this little thickening plot going on. You do wonder where it's going. So I am curious to read the whole series, and I'll let you know. The Book of Laughter and Forgetting by Milan Kundera. I remember reading The Unbearable Lightness of Being a couple of years ago, and I was struck by the precision of Kundera's observation about little human quirks. And what is so particular, I think, about his writing style and like the angle that he decides to tackle his novels and his fiction with is really this sort of like philosophical lens. So what is interesting is that like you really have very gripping sort of scenes and stories, and he would tell them in a way that immediately sort of like, pulls you in and makes you visualize what's going on, and you have very clear characters. And then he will go on to these philosophical digressions and tangents, sort of like meta-analyzing the scene as it goes and meta-analyzing the intentions of the characters as they go and their actions, but without seeming too intrusive. The Book of Laughter and Forgetting specifically has a very interesting form. It's all separate kind of stories, but they're interconnected. So you have characters that sort of drop in and then come back, and characters that sort of have nothing to do with each other, but then they know a character that knows another. The title is very revealing because it is sort of a meditation on memory. It's set in the backdrop of the communist invasion of Czechoslovakia. Obviously, immediately when you talk about invasion or fascism or all these political ebbs and flows, you imagine that it will tackle the theme of memory linked to this very particular human pattern, which is basically that we seem to keep oscillating between moments of rapture and freedom in culture, and then moments where the grip tightens again, and then you have fascism and control. And how memory sometimes is the biggest culprit for these things to keep happening and repeating themselves. What I love about Kundera is really he sort of like tackles these, very serious themes of identity and memory, with how laughable actually it is in the end that we seem to not let go of these narratives that imprison us, these narratives that keep us captive, and especially how it sort of stops us from like moving forward and finding a new way out. It does confront you with the specific importance of stories and how they can have the power to liberate us and to laugh and to make us see the ridiculous, aspect of everything. But at the same time, it is all very serious. And it's all just one and the same thing, two sides of the same coin. but I fucking love this. So next we have Playground by Richard Powers. It was so good. It was so good. It was one of these novels. It made me cry. It really moved me. Oscillates between the past and the present, between different storylines as well, and different characters that have seemingly nothing to do with each other, but obviously you know that eventually their stories and their paths will collide, and the interesting part of it is wondering how they will collide. Richard Powers has the capacity to create the absolute perfect novels. I read Bewilderment of him, which was one of his shortest books, and that also made me cry. And The Overstory, I think it was, which won the Pulitzer Prize at some year, which was a way bigger novel, which was basically about eco-terrorism and people sort of fighting for ecological justice. And that's why I love his novels. They're contemporary, but they have this literary quality because of the writing, because of the mastery of the craft, that is so compelling, and that's so necessary, I think, to read in this time and in this day and age, because those are specifically the novels of our time, the novels that really tackle the big questions that humanity is facing right now with the advent of technology and artificial intelligence, and the intersection between that and, well, our rising sort of like awareness and consciousness about the fragility, not just of our planet, but the fragility of our own internal ecosystems and weathers. This is very much like a novel that tackles the intimacy of friendship and the systems, basically all kinds of systems, and how they're interconnected and related. So the systems, by system I mean like the systems of friendship between people, which are the main characters of our book that I'll get to in a bit, and the systems, the bigger systems of society and of the big actors right now that aren't just political, although very much political, but are like, some people are really these mascots for technological advancement. Even if the path seems to lead towards an inevitable flow, or at least an inevitable lack of restraint, is there still a way to slow down and to meditate and to really, really think about this? And when I spoke about like these books that like leave you sitting with these questions without resolutions, I think these topics are one of the most important topics to really question. So about the story, it's basically about two friends that meet in college, Todd and Raffi, and there's also Ina in it. So we're following like these three storylines, and they're brilliant, and they strike this sort of like beautiful friendship. And so there's this beautiful aspect of it that I love reading about, which is like the sort of like melancholy, nostalgic aspect of old friendships, or like older characters reflecting back upon those significant pillar years. And that little aspect in itself was for me the main emotional through line of the story. The scope kind of gets bigger when you then have Todd, who is one of the main characters, that becomes sort of like a tech billionaire, think Elon Musk kind of type guy. And then you have Raffi that becomes an artist, and whose values really sort of like resist this sort of like imposed domination of these big actors in the world right now that do have the guns and the money to make these things happen. And then you have Ina, who is like a really interesting character, who is a marine biologist, and most of her chapters revolve around like just observing the wonders of the ocean and relaying sort of like the beauty and the fragility of the ecosystems of the sea. Eventually, their paths collide because there is this sort of like atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So, you know, like where there's nothing on the other side of the globe, there's just the ocean. The tech billionaire Todd is like, wants to launch basically this very interesting sort of like new project, and which is why it's called Playground, which would be to create these autonomous sort of like cities and microcosms in the sea. And the people there have to sort of like are confronted with this vote. Like they have to vote whether they would just want to remain in this disintegrating world, and coral reefs are clearly dying and things are clearly crumbling, or a leap of faith. So the question is whether this radical alternative model for society that is based on human ingenuity, placing a bet on technology to save us, whether that's not just another form of play that could be dangerous because of our over-involvement in tinkering with natural forces, whether that is not a play that has too much in the end, negative consequences. Whether we are not just fooling ourselves thinking that our ingenuity and creativity is in itself what will lead us to our inevitable demise. And yet, it's also this, question that keeps coming up that you see also in Greek tragedies. I don't know whether that's a good thing or not, because, when you think about play and the title playground, play when you're children and when you're just dealing with the imagination and not actually tangible things like the natural consequences of tinkering with natural forces. It actually reminds me of this interview that I saw of Richard Powers, where he was talking about sort of the different levels of literature, where you have like the main sort of core conflicts, where you have man versus himself, man versus man, man versus other, and then you have what all of his novels tackle, which is a theme that I love, is like man versus nature. That's Moby Dick, but placed in contemporary world. I also read this in the Philippines, where I was like reading this by the sea, and it made me wonder about all the wonders in there. Beautiful writings on nature and fish. Then I read 2 books of James Salter. I read A Sport and a Pastime and Light Years, which are 2 very different novels. But there is something in James Salter and how he tackles the human connection and family and love as well that is so quiet and precise. So we have A Sport and a Pastime, which is set in the 60s in France, in the countryside of France, and it's this sort of like very intense erotic love affair between a shop girl and a Yale college dropout, and it is about the beginning of relationships, the lust and the desire, and how everything seems to get lost in that. And what I found particularly interesting about this novel is the fact that the narrator himself is a friend of the Yale dropout that is having an affair, having this love story unravel with this woman. He is not in those sexy, erotic, steamy scenes. He's not there, and yet he relays as though it were him living it. It adds this sort of like extra layer. Who gets to tell these stories? What I love about James Salter is really just the prose. It's like spare, but at the same time with a very precise poetic flair that just keeps you in its grip. And I loved it so much. It sort of makes you question also the sort of like disillusionment that happens after the passion between 2 people in the beginning start to show themselves, and where are the limits of that, and whether we engage in those things purely for those highs, and what is lurking behind the corner of that, And then you have Light Years. It tackles the same themes of love and desire and togetherness and family. Well, more family in this case, because it's about a nuclear family specifically, and how they're living this beautiful life. They live around the Hudson River. They are curating beautiful dinners with people, and they're really living out this script of like the nuclear family. Both the married couple in this novel are having affairs with other people. That's not even really central in the novel, but it does make you question sort of like the scripts that are bestowed upon us by society, and how we're supposed to live, and how that seems to be not enough, and how the nuclear configuration itself seems to be a trap, even though love does require sort of like, or seems to require this sort of like exclusivity, or this sort of like coming together of 2 individuals to create this singular story in the end. And this novel was just, I don't know. Again, I was just completely hypnotized by the prose. It was devastating in a very subtle way. Another book with that theme, the theme of love, and love within the confines of societal narratives, is Engagement by Britt Sundström, I think. Actually, this is the only book that I have with me today. Here it is. It's a big book. I remember I found this at a very peculiar time in my life, because I was just like browsing through the bookstore and I saw it, and I love finding books like that, and it really struck me because it was exactly the questions that I was sort of like tackling. What is the place of love, and how do you manage to find freedom within the reality of intimacy? How to make intimacy breathe, and how not to make it its own prison. Marina is the main character. She's the narrator of the novel. novel, and she meets Gustav in the beginning, and there's sort of like this love story that unravels between them, where they're constantly questioning the nature of their love and the nature of their togetherness, constantly discussing it. That makes you then question, your own configurations. And she's always questioning it, because the closer they get, the more smothered she feels. And whenever they do sort of like pull apart, the more she seems to desire and the more she seems to want to be in the very grip and the very prison that she seeks to escape when things get too close. And that's super interesting, because so you follow basically the whole narrative of their unfolding, and it questions monogamy, mononormativity, and whether those things are enough, and how everything seems to revolve around coupledom, and what is coupledom, and how you suddenly lose friends as they sort of like settle with other people, and they sort of like follow the sort of relationship escalator, which is like fall in love and meet and then move in together and then have children and all of that stuff, and how people often find themselves either very comfortable in that story, but yet something seems to be lacking, or they find themselves, like our character Marina, completely lost and ever questioning herself. She's like, am I just a shitty person, But there's this sort of like dry, wry, almost cynical point of view that she holds as she tackles the unraveling of her love story with Gustav. This is a sharp novel about emotional power and about how quickly love can turn into control within the grips specifically of these narratives, and how you can break through or break out of them, and how there is an element of creativity that comes into play when you really want to make the best out of love, out of a union between two people, and how sometimes the scripts aren't enough, and sometimes you do have to question, and you do have to sit within the unresolvedness of things. And maybe again that's where they're confronted with, okay, this is what we're supposed to be doing, we're supposed to move in together, but why does it feel better not to be living together? And okay, we're supposed to be exclusive, but why does it feel better or feel more freeing if we sort of like keep a foot out, or keep sort of like exploring other avenues and other possibilities? And again, who knows? There's no fixed answers to these questions, and that's why I love these novels. And what's interesting about it, I think, is also the fact that it was written in the 70s. It's a Swedish classic, apparently. Nowadays, we have all these new configurations of polyamory and ethical non-monogamy and all of that. But back in the days, in the 70s, it wasn't as popular, and yet you have these characters that are precisely questioning it. So there's also almost this sort of like relational anarchy thing going on. Why does romantic love have to be on top of a ladder, the most important kind of relationship? And what place do other friendships have around that, or other kind of relationships? And is it as real if it's not exactly fitting the scripts? I love those questions, and I would highly recommend this book. It was very readable, in the sense that I was compelled to, like one of these page turners, but also has this Kierkegaardian probing that makes you sort of like love the character despite her cynicism. Another Scandinavian novel that I loved and that I've talked about many times, that I will talk about many times, probably because it's part of like a 6-book series, which are gigantic books. And this is the My Struggle series by Karl Ove Knausgaard. So Karl Ove Knausgaard has done something really interesting with the My Struggle series. So basically, in real life, his father died, and that opened up a sort of Pandora's box of emotions and unresolved traumas and all that, and he decided to, in a Proustian way, write about his own story. It's his life that he decided to write in a novelistic manner. In this particular book, A Man in Love, it's the second, I think it's a third, I'm not sure if it's a third or second installment of My Struggle, where he basically becoming a father, he fell in love with another writer. It's real names, it's real characters, this is real story with his wife at the time, with whom he had several children, Linda Bostrom. It's about him grappling with young fatherhood and sort of like this pull, this desire to become a writer, to be a writer, the ambition almost, and not even just the activity of writing, but really how you juggle creative ambition with the demands and the responsibility of parenthood, of fatherhood, and where the lines between selfhood and family lies. Where do you find yourself within those two poles, and how do you navigate these two poles without losing yourself in either one, and how to find the balance in that? And again, what I find interesting about Karl Ove Knausgaard in his books, and particularly in this series, is how he makes the mundane grand. Like, he can make changing a diaper into this sort of like epic thing. And the sort of particularity of this book, so I don't think it's for everybody, but I think that there's huge rewards in sort of like finishing books like this, or at least the series, which is why I'm challenging myself to read the whole series. It would probably take me several years, is that there's so many boring parts. Because daily life, actually, the life that we live, you know, when you look back in your life and you sort of compile your own narrative, the narrative of your life, and you look at it and you sort of like take key moments and you like connect those key moments, and you have this grand narrative with meaning and an arc and the storyline and whatever. But actually, life is lived in the details, and the details are often boring. It's the paperwork, it's the going to the dentist, it's the changing your kids' diapers, it's the infrastructure, what I call in some of my writing the tragicomic infrastructure of being a person, which is not grand at all, and yet he makes it so. And so there's this like boring, you kind of have to drag yourself sometimes into it, and I don't know why I sort of like did it, but I did it, and I kind of liked it in the end. I kind of like loved the fact that you had this sort of experience, like when you read Proust, most likely, where you're like just like pages upon pages just reading about the most boring thing, but in the end you have this experience as though you have lived the life of the guy. But obviously there's also very gripping scenes, very realistic scene, well, obviously it's his life, but like scenes where, you know, they have dinner parties or like little sort of feuds with like other parents at the school gates or whatever, and you have these like really interesting little conversations. And what I find like very daring from the guy, from the author, is that he would just talk about, he would just talk about the name of a specific person that he had had a conversation with, and he would have like no filter, and he'd just be like, yeah, that guy was an asshole. Like, I found that guy a little bit weird, and how he talked about that, and you know, that was not really my people, and you're just like, whoa, that's insane. So I want to like go through the whole series, because I think in the end, like in the sixth installment of the series, is him grappling with the consequences of having published books like autofiction, where he is literally talking about real people and not even hiding their names. And I don't even know how he got away with that, but it was called one of the biggest literary sensations of contemporary literature, and I understand why. And if you're into that, if you're into Proust and the mundane details and how those little details culminate into a life and find their own thread and find their own meaning joined together, then this book might be for you. I read Inferno by Eileen Myles. So this is a book that I actually listen on audiobook, which is funny because I'm actually not usually very into audiobooks when they're fiction, but this is kind of also particular because you kind of feel that there's like an autobiographical element to it. So Eileen Myles is a poet, a very known poet. She's based, I think, in New York, and this is like, it's called Inferno, a novel. It's about her unraveling of being, it's about being a poet in New York in the 70s, I believe. So all the times of the Patti Smith and all that. And it was just hilarious. It was so funny. She's the one who actually narrated the audiobook, so I think that's what made me sort of stick around. And she just has this very almost kind of British humor in a weird way, because like she's American, but it has this edge to it. What I love about this book is like this aspect of turning your life into a myth and sort of making fun of yourself from doing it. And this sort of self-deprecating humor done really well is so charming, and I love this book precisely because it just could make me laugh, but at the same time it did sort of like tackle a certain depth of, like, you know, poets and performers and people who live a creative life and people who want to sort of like put themselves out there, and how comical it can get, almost how you can get wrapped up in all of that shit. And I think it's the only way to write a novel like that, to make it compelling, is to sort of like mock yourself throughout and sort of like make fun of how you take yourself so serious. I have this in my own life where I just like take myself way too seriously until you realize it's ridiculous, and then you laugh at yourself, and that like you sort of like oscillate between those poles. And I thought that this book was absolutely charming and made my chores as I was like listening to it and doing the laundry and stuff way better. And I will definitely be reading more of Eileen Myles. There's a book of hers that I really want to love called Chelsea Girls. Again, a lot of lesbian love. I think also in Inferno, what was cool, what I liked is it was like really, she was really talking about her like sort of own queer lesbian awakening, and that part was kind of sexy. It was cool. I liked it. This was a light book, and I think it's good to finish it with all the seriousness that I've just been talking about. Another light book, the last amazing novel that I read this year was Fair Play by Tove Jansson, another Scandinavian novel. This one was really beautiful and really light and really nice. It was basically about two artists that live sort of in the same building, two women that are friends. And it's about like their little adventures together. And again, one of these books that is centered around like, life isn't lived in the details. They go on trips, they go on an island off the Finnish peninsula. I think it's a Finnish book, but I keep sort of like confusing all of this, so maybe I'm completely off the charts. But what I liked was like the funny conversations that they've had, and you have these like, the chapters are very short, but the sort of like scenes, these moments are just so interesting in their aesthetic and also in the dialogue and what they talk about. I just love it when, you have these novels when the dialogue doesn't feel predictable. It's when you really feel like, oh, these are real people. These could be real people. And this is based off of like probably genuine experiences and a sort of like wit that you cannot predict, that don't often just unfold in novels. And that's what I loved about this. So this was light. It's about that friendship between two old women and how cute they were. It's like this feeling of reading a children's book or like watching cartoons in the morning kind of vibe. But sometimes actually not sometimes, always, friendship is the most important thing. And even behind love and behind all this, that is the glue that keeps society together, I guess, even if I didn't want to make it corny, but here I am making it corny. Another sort of honorable mention by the same author was The Summer Book, and this was more about like a grandmother and her grandchild and their little adventures in this little island. And I love these books, I love these books that are about human connection, but they're not about romantic love. The tenderness that she portrays and how she portrays these connections with such calm, and it almost feels like that's the depth that we're looking for here. Talking about the new year, I always feel like depth in itself, people confuse it often with seriousness, and again we're going back into this sort of like theme of seriousness and not taking yourself too seriously. But I think that a lot of depth comes out of these books, because depth isn't just serious. Actually, it's far from that. It's play, and that's what these two old women prove. I guess I'm happy to have read these books, and I'm happy to have sat in the questions that they probed in me, that they created in me. May we keep reading these books that make us actually ask better questions. All right, guys. All right, beautiful readers of the internet. Maybe one day we shall meet. Oh, there's actually something that I wanted to talk about. I have relaunched my Substack a few months ago. I've been talking about it for several videos in the past and then kind of got lost in there. But I have relaunched it, and I will link it down below. It's called Notes from the Prism. I write about eroticism, beauty, the art of becoming, and this sort of like sitting in the questions, just being in the motions, and finding fixity in non-fixity. Or like that's a redundant statement perhaps, but just being in the motion and living the questions, that's what my Substack is about. So if you're interested in reading some of my work, that's where you can go. I am not gonna do a video anymore with a fire behind me with the fucking huge ass sweater. I'm sweating my ass off, but you know what, it's okay. Next time I'll be naked. I'll just pixelize my nipples. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that. Anyway. May you frolic in the fragrant pages of a good book, and I'll see you in the next one. What? Again?